Hey, before this video starts, I just wanted to say huge thank you to Installation00 for doing this. It was an honor to have him on the channel. If you're somehow not subscribed to him, well, please go make sure you're subscribed to him. He's an incredible, he's got an incredible channel. He's on his way to 100K. He's in the middle of a race to 100K, so let's help him get to 100K first, all right? All right, and I think that's all I have to say. This was literally a last-minute recording. You know what? I'll just shut up and let you get to the video now. Okay, bye. There we are.
Lovely.
All right, there we are. We're recording.
Sweet.
And I have no idea how to start.
That's fine. That's fine. Well, I thought we were going to talk about different mysteries and how mysteries are created and how mystery is deepened by asking and answering questions.
Yeah, Halo tends to be really good at that, especially I'd say the original trilogy is the prime example of it. When you step out into the ring in Halo Combat Evolved, by that point you've had your protagonists set up, you've had your antagonists set up. You know, you have the UNSC, the good guys, you have the Covenant, the bad guys, and the goal of the UNSC is to fight the Covenant. You know what your goal is. You know your goal is to survive. What you don't know is where you are, why this thing exists, or who built it, all that jazz. And it kind of creates this weird atmosphere, and the more they answer it, the more tension it brings. Like, why did they build the Halos? Oh, well, it was because this super scary space parasite called the Flood exists, and it's a 29,000 light year killing super weapon. And then,
yeah, see, I like that in the original game there was no broadcasting about the existence of the Flood in any of the box art, any of the media, anything. Nothing was spoiled about the existence of the Flood. So you that first moment you step out of the life pod and you're greeted by the arc of the Halo up over the top of you. You can just stand and kind of marvel at what it is and why it exists and why it's so large, and you can ask your own sort of internal questions as to why the ring is there. And as you progress more, you find buildings or structures that don't seem to serve a very obvious purpose. So you can speculate on what they do, and the more it goes on, the more mystery sort of crops up about this installation you're on, and the fact that it's similar enough to real world human constructions that you start to get almost a subconscious feeling that it's for something quite nefarious almost. It's the reason that this ring world exists is for a very strong and meaningful purpose. And only upon going to the swamp in the level 343 Guilty Spark and actually encountering the Flood do you start to realize the whole purpose of the ring. And then obviously the monitor guides you through the process of getting the index, and you learn more about why this thing needs to be activated. And then you have that big revelation in 2 Betrayals where you realize that actually the whole purpose of it is to wipe out sentient life, and suddenly the guy that was helping you, the monitor that was helping you, is now an enemy because he wants to wipe out all life. It's the steady pitching of questions and then giving almost half answers, not full answers, continues to sow that seed of but why, and the why question is I think what drives a lot of the narrative behind the mysteries of Halo. Why is this necessary? Why is this installation the way it is? Why are the Flood such a huge risk?
yeah. And I feel like that revelation in Halo 2 that there was another ring. Granted, I believe Guilty Spark mentions that there are other installations, but it's super easy to forget or overlook. And so in Halo 2, when you're playing it, and then an Amberclad comes into view of it's Installation 05, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes into view of 05, you're like, whoa, hold up, there's another one? How many of these things are out there? And then the Ark.
Yeah.
The Ark is just this huge manufacturing center for Halos, and you're wondering what what exactly happened here, and you kind of get that answer with the terminals, but you don't get that answer, and it's really just a matter of building these environments. And I guess it's a matter of just building these environments, spending a lot of time in them, and never giving you this complete answer. And you'd think that after a while, the pattern would get predictable. It's like, oh, and it turns out there's going to be an even bigger mystery, but it somehow manages to continue to surprise you in other ways.
I think that to a degree speaks to our own human curiosity. So we're a naturally inquisitive species, and we're one of the first, at least to our knowledge, one of the first species to actually ask questions in the pursuit of knowledge. So you can train silverback gorillas and chimpanzees sign language, so they can communicate with humans. But not once has a chimpanzee or a gorilla asked a question in the pursuit of knowledge. It's a defining human characteristic, and the recipe of pitching questions, not necessarily literal questions, but metaphorically, with the existence of the halo ring, the existence of the flood, the complexities of the relationship between the forerunners, their installations, and the threat of the flood, and then answering them with half answers, and suddenly being presented with yet another question or more questions, is a very human-centric process that we've been doing for most of our history. There was a human that questioned why we had to stay cold all the time, and then we managed to harness fire. It's like, okay, but what can I use this fire for? Oh, I can cook my food. Okay, that's fine. But then that advances. You extrapolate that out to its nth degree. Fire can now be reappropriated to boil water, to then turn turbines to generate electricity. Okay, but why do we want to generate electricity? Electric heating, electric lighting. Okay, and then that leads into computers. The computers have allowed us to calculate even larger quantities of massive data, and pitch even more sophisticated and complex questions, and run simulations about the existence of the universe and the nature of the laws of physics. It's intrinsically human to ask a question, be given an answer, and then have 10 more questions that all have their own answers that have 10 more questions. And Halo is it's mimicked that process, that pattern that humanity has worked by in our own evolution, by presenting a question, giving an answer that results in more questions. And I think it also takes a certain type of person to want to answer those questions. You'll get a lot of casual players who will play Halo, and they'll play the campaign, they'll enjoy the story, and then it's done. But the people that really get into Halo are a particular type of person who are inclined to ask questions, who are inclined to find the answers, who are inclined to be curious and to seek knowledge. So I think the more involved player, generally speaking, is a very specific type of person that, at least from my experience, are also scientifically or engineering minded, or are creative in some degree, because our minds naturally work that way. And Halo presents a story that allows us to experience and use those skills that our minds have developed over our lifetimes, but also within a fictional setting that is compelling and immersive.
It's funny that you bring up the distinction between the regular casual player and the I'd say and the more dedicated player, because I was gonna bring up my friend Cal. He plays Halo with me from time to time. We've played through every single Halo, including the one we don't mention, 5.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the other week we were going through Combat Evolved, and he was like, wait. The Halo rings kill life? I'm like, you're just figuring this out? And I feel like that's a good point to make, because he's been playing Halo with me for years. since we were
Yeah,
like, I'd say maybe 9, 10,
exactly. Yeah, it's
and he's the fact that he's just figuring this out. It's I feel like it. I don't know if it's just that he's the one that just likes to focus on the combat loop or something else, but I think it is a good distinction to make that uh, distinction clear between the casual and more dedicated inquisitive player. Inquisitive.
yeah. I think it's because, especially the way that the dialogue um, and information is portrayed through the games is so seamless, and you can get sort of caught up in the wonder of Halo that you don't actually fully pay attention to what's being said. So even the very fact that when 343 Guilty Spark first introduces himself to you, he says he's the monitor of Installation04. Well, that implies there's at least 3 others, but nobody clocks that initially. They're not like, Installation 04? Oh, that means there's at least 3. This must be the 4th one. There must be 3 more at least. And if not just 4, there must be more than 4. No one thinks that. Even people who are naturally inquisitive don't think that. It's only later on, upon playing the campaign back a second or third time, or paying particular attention to when Guilty Spark says, once the other installations follow suit, this galaxy will be quite devoid of life. When he says that, then it's like, other installations? Hang on a minute. And then suddenly the penny drops. It's like, of course, this is the 4th installation. This is Installation 04. There are, it's... Even for people who are naturally inquisitive and seek answers and seek knowledge, can miss it because it's so seamlessly the thread of narrative is so seamlessly woven into the fabric of Halo that it's easy to miss. And I also think that's actually kind of without getting into too much away from the subject of matter at hand. I do think that's a large in part the reason we're getting so much almost throwback, so to speak, for 343 Industries. I think the casual player of the original Halo games could be satisfied by the existence of the simple 3 pillars of combat, sort of grenades, melee, and weapons, and they were happy to get into that exciting 30 seconds and repeat, wash and repeat, and would then put the game down, step away, and go and play something else. Meanwhile, the recipe that they've come to be accustomed with has changed slightly with the 343 adaptations of the newer Halo games, and it's thrown them through a loop. And because it's so much more narrative heavy, because I don't know about you, I strongly think that Bungie made more of a habit of implying story, whereby 343 enforce story and make statements.
Yeah, 343 tends to... I think the big issue with 343 is they tend to take the campaigns, right, and they put it to be extremely dialogue heavy, and it's not necessarily that they do it poorly per se, because it does enhance the story in some instances, like how Chief and Cortana, their dynamic in Halo 4, in my opinion, it did enhance the story, but the thing is that like Halo 5, it gets so dialogue heavy that they're constantly talking, and every time they talk, they also definitively answer the question. Like, it's like, what's Genesis? Oh, Genesis is the hub world of the domain. It's where Cortana is. Blah 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 blah. There's not really any mystery to Halo 5 because everything is answered. The question.
Yeah.
And
so, those differences in ideals are more evident. It's not just to the casual gamer, but also to those people who like to answer the question or like to seek the knowledge. Because it kind of spoils the fun if you're seeking knowledge and then in the question literally 30 seconds later is answered for you. It's like, well, okay, well, I won't bother asking the question next time then.
Yeah, because they just answer it.
So I think that the without straying too far off topic, I think the reason we're seeing so much more kickback for 343 is as a consequence of this shift in dynamic and the fact that it's now no longer what we've grown accustomed to in regards to pitching questions and then leaving the player to answer them, or at least leaving a prolonged amount of time to start giving little like dribs and drabs of information that then help the player along to a conclusion. It needs to be. I mean, Infinite's already looking this way anyway. It's already looking like it's got more questions than answers, which is great because that's going to play into the old. Yeah, it's going to play to those old dynamics, and it's going to make people thirst for knowledge again and get people really involved. And I'm really excited about the history that Zeta Halo has, and discovering those mysteries firsthand, and also being pitched loads of new mysteries and asking questions and finding answers yourself and being resourceful. It's important for the well-being of Halo for that ideal is thread into the narrative.
I think oh, sorry, were you still going?
No, go on.
I think a good example of the element of mystery and tension through a lack of answer is Shadows of Reach, and how it just generates so much tension from the fact that you don't know what the other person is doing. I found it really, I guess, mind-boggling at times how intense it could be, because the Spartans, they don't know what the Reach Militia, I'll just say Reach Militia, they don't know what the Reach Militia is planning half the time. The Banished don't know what the Spartans are planning. The Spartans don't know what the Banished are planning, and then, the Banished don't know what the Banished are planning half the time because they're so disorganized.
Yeah.
And
there's
it's that sheer act of not knowing
Yeah.
what the enemy is doing and how it could really come to bite your favorite character in the ass, so to speak. It generates a lot of tension.
Yeah, there is some in storytelling. There is some poetry in ignorance. Not answering every question leaves things open to interpretation, and the more things you leave to interpretation, the more the reader, the person who's playing, the person who's experiencing the narrative can get sucked in and become emotionally invested in the story. And you're absolutely right. Like the way that Shadows of Reach executes, I mean, that speaks to Troy Denning's writing capabilities. But I'm also fully aware that Troy sort of wrote a script for how that it was all going to play out. And 343 stepped in on a few points and goes and said things like, "Oh, you can't say that. We're not ready to reveal that yet. Oh, you can say this and maybe tweak this here." So they actually gave a lot of feedback and guidance on what could and could not be spoken about in Shadows of Reach. Now that fills me with hope that Troy is a phenomenally good writer anyway, but that fills me with hope that 343 are finally looking at it and thinking, no, we shouldn't tell them that yet because we want to reveal that later on. It's like spoiler alert for Shadows of Reach. The fact that there's an arc portal on Earth, on Reach, and the fact that I think it was the Keepers of the One Freedom specifically, wasn't it, that went through the arc portal?
It was the Keepers that went through the arc, and then the arc portal, and
of course the Keepers are more religious zealots than they are mercenaries. So that straight away, the fact that there's an arc portal on Reach, then you wonder, okay, well, is that what we see in the game Reach? And I'm inclined to believe it is. Then you start to question, okay, well, the Keepers of One Freedom, the One Freedom went through, and the Banished remained. Why? What are the Keepers going to be doing at the Ark? And obviously, we know because of the previous stories told, the Spirit of Fire is at the Ark. So, and also, I think I remember reading it correctly. Atriox, if I recall correctly, did he come back through the portal?
Yeah, he came back to Reach. That's where he and was it Castor Callum?
Yeah, Castor.
Castor, yeah, there we are. That's when the two had a bit of a confrontation, and Atriox basically told Gato guy, I don't know how to pronounce his name, that silent sword, Sangheili, okay, go kill him, and then Castor basically had this had one of the members of the Ferret Squad, which, by the way, that's another thing that I hope they answer sometime. What's going on there with Ferret Squad and the Keepers? I also want to point out that Shadows of Reach also brought in other aspects like Ferret Squad and Locust with the Keepers.
Yes.
Like I'm wondering what's going on there. Are they? It seems like they are no longer. It seems like they're no longer part of the UNSC. But then they gave that note to Fred and they warned him off.
Exactly.
But then they're talking to Fred like he's a demon. And so I'm wondering, like, are they trying to infiltrate the Keepers? Are they with the Keepers? Do they believe in the Great Journey now?
See, I think personally that the Ferret team they're infiltrating the Keepers, as kind of part of an Oni initiative, but that doesn't rule out the distinct possibility that there are humans that have come to fall in line with the Banished and do perhaps, well, at least with the Keepers, do perhaps believe in the Great Journey. There were at least religions elsewhere in the Halo universe that believed as such.
Right.
So, I mean, it's the fact that questions have been posed and not answered. So like, how did the Arc portal get activated from the Arc side? How did the Banished did the Banished know that it was going to be activated on Reach? Because it's rather convenient that they were there waiting for basically Atriox to walk through it.
I have a feeling. What was that AI that they mentioned that the Keepers, that Forerunner AI that the Keepers have been talking to, the Forerunner AI?
Oh, I can't remember the name now.
Yeah, I can't remember the name either. Huh.
I've got the book behind me, but it'll be a case of flicking through and trying to find the name.
Yeah, I'll figure it out and just
Yeah.
like put the name on screen.
Yeah.
Or something. I have a feeling maybe that AI might have done it, but the question is, does that AI have the clearance to open a portal to the Ark? And that raises a whole variety of other questions and the more questions.
Yeah.
I think
so this is again one of the just to sort of segue briefly. This is kind of one of the driving forces behind that. I mean, you saw the video last night, the new series, so to speak, that I've just started up. The cartographer.
The reboot of the cartographer.
Yeah. So the whole idea about it is literally to go level by level for the entire series of Halo games and look at things and all the little hidden mysteries and muse on the functions of different things in every single level. And at the moment, it's relatively not mundane, but it's relatively sort of straightforward because we're playing the levels for the first time. But for example, when you get to the level keys, you go back to the Truth and Reconciliation. Suddenly, looking at the differences of the Truth and Reconciliation versus the first time you were there, and looking at the mysteries as to why the key mind is the way that it is. Sorry, the proto-grave mind, not the key mind.
Yeah,
is the way that it is.
Technically, it's a key mind because of the stuff Halo Wars 2 did to the definition of key mind. It's weird. I don't know why they had to change that, but that's just me.
Yeah, it's I'm just rather peculiar, but I'm willing to accept it. But it's one of the driving forces behind that, and the more time goes on, the more that's going to get more interesting to theorize, and I'm hoping. As time goes on and it gets closer to the launch of Infinite, it'll really sort of build up hype for the mysteries that are going to come in Halo Infinite. So,
sorry, go on.
Yeah, so the whole idea of having mystery sewn back into the fabric of Halo is I think paramount to Halo Infinite being successful. And really, if Halo Infinite is successful, that guarantees then the franchise will continue on for a long time to come.
Right. I also think another thing to note is Atriox is back. He's no longer at the Ark, which means Escharum it might not necessarily be the big bad. I want to know, is Atriox going to come to play in Infinite? Are we going to get that Atriox versus Master Chief fight, which would be interesting to say the least? I have a feeling that there's going to be like a whole debate in the comments about that. But
Yeah, but I
like,
think
how's that
again,
going to work?
well, we're looking at 10 years. Like Halo Infinite's supposed to be the next 10 years of Halo.
Right.
It's supposed to be a platform for 10 years of storytelling. So yeah, okay, Escharum has been revealed to us in the trailers as being possibly a big boss battle that's on its way, but that doesn't mean it's the boss battle. That could just be that it's the boss battle for this initial release of Halo Infinite, and then as new stories come online later down the line, new bosses come into play. So I think now Atriox is back in the galaxy, I think it's inevitable at some point or another Chief is going to be confronted by Atriox or vice versa. And to sow that kind of narrative over such a long period of time, I mean, you got to think. So we've just been told now about Escharum. There's a lot of mystery surrounding Escharum anyway, but we've just been told this minute about Escharum,
Right.
and it's been hinted that we're going to go up against him at some point. Let's say after the first, I don't know, maybe year of content, we finally, or the planned first year of content, we finally come face to face with Escharum and have this epic battle that's apparently supposed to, echo through the ages. So the fact that at some point or another we're going to battle Escharum, and I would like to think survive it. That means that then more stories will be told later down the line in this 10-year narrative, and then maybe towards the end of that 10-year narrative, we finally are confronted by Atriox, and of course Atriox has lost his right hand man. He's lost his commander. Escharum is one of the big dogs, so to speak.
Right.
So the fact that there's that much history then between Atriox and Chief, that Chief is responsible for taking down his right hand man and probably huge swathes of his army, and at the same breath, Atriox is very, very different from normal brutes. If you consider that in Halo Wars 2, he came to respect Cutter. Even though he was still going to war against him, he was still going to battle him, he was still going to fight him, he respected him. And I've got this feeling that when it comes to the time that Chief is confronted by Atriox, there's going to be this really strange mutual respect of warriors.
I feel like
that we haven't seen Chief express to anybody before, because he didn't even express like a respect, so to speak, towards the Didact.
Right.
So to have Chief perhaps be confronted by a fellow warrior that's as battle hardened and as grizzled as he is, and have kind of almost a man in the mirror kind of moment where they see the similarities of each other in themselves. That's going to be kind of quite a breakthrough moment, I think.
I think since we're on the topic of like the right hand man thing, I think one thing that is going to be really difficult for 343 is we know that we're likely going to defeat Escharum, so the threat of the Master Chief dying isn't going to be what is scary to us. It's not going to be what intimidates us. So we're going to have to so 343 has to figure out, okay, the audience knows that Chief goes on to the sequel, so to speak. How does he get past it, right? And I think since we're talking about the right hand man thing, I'm almost imagining Escharum as being like, I don't know if you're familiar with the characters, because I don't know how familiar with Destiny you are, but Crota, and how we kill Crota, the son of Oryx, and then Oryx gets pissed off, and so in the next year we're fighting Oryx.
Yeah. See, I don't think it's massively likely, but there's a possibility. Okay, so Chief doesn't have to die to no longer be an active character.
Go on.
So effectively, the battle between Chief and Escharum could be so monumental that Chief is damaged, injured beyond repair. In which case he then would have to step down as the Spartan. And then, like you say, since we're talking about right-hand men, there's a couple of Spartans, prominent Spartans, that could fill Chief's boots. Fred, one of them, and Jerome. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of Spartan 3s that would be worthy to fill Chief's boots. And in the ultimate kind of um, inclusion kind of idea, the the possibility of your own character, your own Spartan, your own Spartan 4 being Chief's replacement is a possibility as well,
You know, it's
whereby Chief as a character, as a playable character, is pulled back, and he becomes not a side character per se, but he becomes this kind of mysterious, awesome ancient warrior that's kind of somewhat on the sidelines, and you become the new Spartan, the poster boy of the UNSC, so to speak.
right.
There's a way that there is a way that could be the seeds could be sown in such a way to lead to that eventuality.
I find it interesting that you bring up the idea of Chief stepping down, because I remember this was a while back, but wasn't there a statement from 343 basically saying, "Oh, well, we know where we want to take the Master Chief story, we know where it ends, things like that." And I'm wondering, like,
Yeah,
since you bring that up, could we see the Master Chief being forced to step down? And I feel like before we knew Infinite was going to be a 10-year platform, a lot of people were thinking this might be the last ride of Master Chief, so to speak, especially with Steve Downes basically saying, hey, this is... Didn't he say this is like his last outing as the Master Chief or something like that?
I don't recall anything specifically, but you may have heard something I haven't, so I won't rule it out.
Yeah, I'm... don't quote me on that one, then.
But
Yeah.
This is something. The whole theme. Chief can't go on forever. He can't.
Right.
As much as we'd love him to, he can't. And this is something I've covered a few times in a few different videos. And one of the ones that jumps to mind immediately is how Master Chief should die, but John should live.
Right.
So that's a video I did quite a while ago now. It was actually initially inspired by a viewer's comment, and I read the comment and it put this image in my head I couldn't shift, so I expanded upon it and turned it into a whole video on its own. And the idea is that Chief could go through it for an epic battle. I mean, in the video I say it's against the Didact. It could be against Escharum. It could be against Atriox. I don't know, but the punchline of the idea is that Chief would be injured to the point that he would appear like he's dead. In fact, Spartans have been dead before and been brought back to life. Linda is one of them. She flatlined at the end of the Fall of Reach, and Chief managed to whack her into cryo just in time, and she was revived later on in First Strike by Dr. Halsey.
Right.
So Spartans have died. They flatlined before. Chief could flatline. Chief could die in every way you could possibly consider him to die. He could die,
Right,
and then be brought back later. And I turn the video around at the very end and make it so that a man dressed in officer's uniform walks into the training room for a new generation of Spartans, and it orbits around him. And this officer narrates the quote that was originally spoken to the Spartan 2s by Dr. Halsey. You've been called upon to serve. You'll be the protector of Earth and all her colonies. And it's revealed at the last minute to be the Master Chief. You don't have to do a face reveal. You could literally just orbit the camera up to the point that you see MCPO 117 on his chest or something, or something, and then have it revealed that Chief's still alive, but he's no longer like active duty.
right.
And it can also still play in to a couple of other videos I've done where I think this is about the whole idea of open world, an open world aspect to Halo Infinite, where I talk about the possibility that at the end of quote unquote the campaign of Halo Infinite, Chief goes back to, say, the Infinity to take his armor off, and he passes your Spartan, a Spartan 4, and then you can have this moment where you can go over to almost kind of a Spartan Ops kind of side of things, and you see that same cutscene play out, but from your Spartan's perspective.
Oh, that would be a really nice way to tie into things.
And Chief could nod to that Spartan, and it would be almost a kind of an informal passing of the baton. It's like you're up, it's your turn, So yeah, the idea that Chief can go on forever, no, he can't. I mean, even if the way that Chief is quote unquote killed off is that he ends up similar to how he was at the end of Halo 3, where he's out there somewhere.
Yeah,
we just don't know where.
And that does somewhat, I guess, add a little bit of tension to the Master Chief story, because now it's a question of, okay, so we know he's going to end. When does he end?
Yeah,
And
and and
the,
I do recall,
yeah,
yeah, quite powerfully that 343 did say, yeah, they know where Chief Story's going and they know how it's going to end, and the fact that they chose those words, they wouldn't have done that lightly. They specifically chose the words, "We know how his story ends," which
yeah,
means
and
they have
those
they
are
have an
some
end in
those are some
sight.
words right there. Like
Yeah,
those are the kinds of words that I you know what, there was a metaphor I was going to make, and it slipped my mind. So keep going.
so yeah, the fact that they chose those words, that means the Chief Story is going to end, and they're fully aware that um, that someone else is going to have to lead the franchise. Because at the end of the day, what's a Halo game without a 7 foot tall armored badass on the front cover?
ODST.
You know, true. Yeah, yeah. I mean that.
But
Yeah, absolutely. No,
sorry, I was
it
being a
stood.
bit of a smartass there for a
No, no,
second.
no, no. You're absolutely right. ODST stood on its own really, really well, and I'm still hoping for either a sequel to ODST being able to be built in the Infinite engine as part of this new 10-year narrative, or even go a step further and look at like the Spartan 3s wearing SPI armor. So it's actually more of a stealth kind of styled mission where you rely upon your armor's camouflaging technology in order to skirt around enemies that could, in theory, be too powerful to and could overwhelm you if you're reckless.
Right.
Um, those games can completely stand on their own 2 feet. I've got no doubt about it whatsoever. ODST did it, and I'm absolutely certain that it could be done again.
Right.
But the mainline Halo games need a Spartan, so to speak, as the front line
Yeah.
kind of character that you quote unquote drive around. And like I say, there's some really compelling candidates. Fred is one of them. Jerome is another one.
I feel
There's
like
some Spartan 3s and Spartan 4s that would be able to do it. And yeah, Chief story ending doesn't mean the end of Halo.
right.
It just means the next step.
And I feel like Jerome would be a likely candidate, and that begs the question: okay, how does the Spirit of Fire get off the Ark, or how does Jerome get off the Ark in particular? And
Well, yeah,
going back to the mystery thing for a second, I wanted to mention Halo Infinite has huge potential for its open world, because I think you nailed it. You nailed it. The point that you spend a lot of time going past these mysterious structures and things like that, and you can kind of get this familiar sense, but you don't really know what they're for. And I
yeah.
feel like there's a lot of potential for Halo Infinite. It's supposedly going to be open world, and I'm wondering, like, I gotta say, if that big tower that I keep seeing in the trailers and on the box art isn't the Palace of Pain, I'm throwing hands. I'm throwing hands. That's all I'm saying.
See, I think that's the Palace of Pain. Is a it's a singular word that I think describes multiple facilities. And so the Palace of Pain, I think, it's because you've got to consider that the people who coined that term were ancient humans and devolved ancient humans at that.
Right.
They were sort of like cavemen level, hunter gatherer level kind of technological sophistication.
Right.
So I think the Palace of Pain, although it suggests it's a singular place, I think it's actually a singular name for multiple flood research facilities. And the reality is that flood research facilities, as we've seen with every other installation, are scattered far and wide across the Halo,
Right.
mainly for compartmentalization purposes and for containment purposes. And given how big the suggested area that we could explore in a Halo Infinite is, it's possible there could be a few flood research facilities in the playable area.
And in that case, would if the flood are? I mean, I think it's safe to say that at this point, like, even though they haven't really teased the flood, save for that one little possible thing that you found, probably is in the 2018 trailer. They haven't really tease the flood. So, but I feel like at this point it's safe to say that
They won't.
there's going to be some sort of flood thing in Infinite.
Yeah, I think they've learnt. They've already said it's going to be Halo Infinite is a soft reboot.
Right.
And the spirit in which Halo Infinite is being developed is strikingly similar to both Halo CE and Halo 3, hence the use of Marty's iconic E Dorian chord,
Right.
In the music. So I think because of that, in a similar manner to the way they executed the advertisement and the distribution of Halo CE, they will not specify that the Flood are in Halo Infinite. They just won't. They'll maybe do some really subtle hints, like that really brief moment that there's perhaps possibly maybe the sensing appendage of a Flood infection form in that well-like construction.
Yeah.
Aside from that, they are not going to reveal it because they want it to be a surprise in the same way that the Flood were a surprise in Halo CE. But also you've got to bear in mind that every ring we've been to has Flood on it.
Right.
And as such, the Halos they're both weapons of mass destruction, landscapes of conservation, and Flood research facilities. So the reality is you're going to see all three of those aspects in Halo Infinite. You're going to see it being a weapon.
Well, I think one thing that's notable about Zeta Halo that we haven't seen on the other installations, as far as I know, maybe we see some fish in Halo 2. Maybe no, I think that was on High Charity. But
no, there are fish on Halo 2.
Oh yeah, okay. I think one thing that stood out to me, even when I first played Combat Evolved, though back then it wasn't as notable to me as it is now, but one thing that I think is kind of overlooked is when you go to, when you start playing Combat Evolved, a notable detail is take away the music and what's left? Silence. Like there's no animals, there's nothing. It's kind of just empty.
It's dead.
It's dead, yeah. And so I think that it's curious to me that on Zeta Halo, especially one with such a history of Flood, that there is animals. I mean, we even saw like these weird, I don't know what to call it in the demo, but they were like these tiny little animals. And we also saw some birds, so I'm wondering, maybe there isn't Flood. Maybe the plot twist isn't that there's Flood on Zeta Halo. Maybe that they're kind of egging us on towards that. And maybe the plot twist is, surprise! Remember those extragalactic Flood we mentioned a while back? Yeah, they're here now. Or something like that.
So, I mean, Zeta Halo's interesting and unique in quite a few different reasons, in quite a few different ways, rather. One, because it's part of the senescent array, which means it's actually it was originally 30,000 kilometers in diameter, not 10,000 kilometers in diameter. It's older, much older than the Halo rings we've been to so far. It's been scaled down due to severe damage that it experienced, but it's still the older version, so to speak, of the rings. And yeah, the presence of life. I'm in two minds. In one regard, I think the absence of life in the previous games could be tied down to the processing power of the time. Right. The amount of computational power that's needed to render, animate, and place wildlife would be very taxing on the system when you want to achieve everything else as well. Right. So, in reality, the absence of life forms in the previous games, I think could be tied down to that. But there's also the fact that in Halo the Flood,
right?
I think
didn't they mention that there's like no animals?
Explicit that they found it odd that there was this Halo installation was rich for life. It's the perfect conditions for life, and yet there is none, and that's haunting. Why is this place so perfect for life, but there is no life?
Right.
So so the absence of life on the installations could even just be down to the containment failures. So definitely on Halo 2, the fact that there was a containment failure and that there are Flood sort of free roaming along the even though they're contained within the Sentinel wall, the failure of containment might have led to the lack of life.
Right.
And you also got to bear in mind that the amount of area that we actually visited in both of the games is actually quite a small cross section of the available area, the land that the Halos have.
Right.
I think I did a calculation once that on average the amount of land surface area, so to speak, that is habitable on the inner surface of the Halo is 15 million square kilometers. So the fact that we only visit some very small isolated pockets of that 15 million square kilometers could mean that we've just completely missed where all the wildlife are.
Right.
Because you can still walk around Halo CE and Halo 2 and hear birds and hear insects, but you don't see any of the large mammals or reptiles or other types of creatures that you would expect. And that may just simply be that they're not in those particular areas. But the fact that there is life on Zeta Halo, it makes it unique, at least versus what we've seen before, and that's going to make an interesting dynamic anyway.
Yeah, and I feel like it also adds to this. I feel like it also adds to the mystery of it, especially for like. I think it sort of adds to the mystery of. I'm not really sure how to articulate this. I suppose that it adds to the mystery of like, okay, so if the flood, if there are a lot of flood containment facilities here, what's going to happen with all these animals? Like, if let's say that the flood get out, is it possible that we're gonna see, like, we've seen it in expanded media, but we haven't seen it in the games. We have never seen like a let's just take those rhinoceros looking things that we saw in the 2018 trailer. Like, what's gonna happen if the flood infect that? That's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, terrifying. Yeah, and it's all part of the possibilities that Halo Infinite could bring. I mean, it could all play into flood biomass. It could be, it can go any possible way you can imagine, and that's like I said, that's one of the big reasons that I'm so looking forward to it.
Oh, I just had a nightmare thought for what those rhino things could be if, converted to a flood form.
Yeah.
Massive carrier forms that charge into enemy lines and explode, raining
Christ.
infection forms from the sky.
Oh no! Yeah.
That would be cool. Scary or terrifying and awesome at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it just plays into the possibilities and the questions. I think that's what gives Infinite so much potential, and I hope that. I don't think 343 is going to waste this chance. I think that Infinite's going to be a pretty solid game, especially if Joe Staten's giving it props.
Yeah.
But who knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
We'll find out, won't we?